In a move that highlights the idiocy of rent control laws, a New York City real estate broker charged a tenant $20,000 in broker fees for finding them a rent-controlled unit in Upper West Side of Manhattan. I'm Tony, and this is Real Estate Investing and Landlord News. All right, so I have an interesting article for you today, and it's coming once again out of New York City. Now, obviously, I've covered the rent control issue in New York a lot of times because it is the picture-perfect case of the worst-case scenario for rent control laws, okay? So if you want to see how bad the rent control makes things for a place, just take a look at New York. Now, in this story in particular, what we ended up with is a real estate broker who was charging this outrageous fee for securing a rent-controlled unit for a tenant. Now, the purpose of rent control, according to all the advocates and all of that, is to provide lower income housing to people, to make housing more affordable. So why is it that tenants are able to pay $20,000 down payment for getting this unit? Because they know it's a good deal and they don't really need the money savings. They're just trying to get a good deal out of it. And instead of the landlord being the one to collect this money, guess what? It's this middleman, this real estate broker. Now, I obviously don't have any issues with real estate brokers, real estate agents, or whoever is doing this sort of thing. They're playing the game in the way that it was written, okay? My issue isn't that. My issue is that the rent control itself is what's causing this, and it's creating these scenarios that, like I said, there's always unintended consequences. If they think that people aren't going to try to find workarounds for rent control, they're out of their minds. If they think that landlords aren't just going to stop buying properties and start slowly figuring out ways to turn rent-controlled units into unregulated units, they're out of their minds, okay? If they think that we're going to just sit there and comply and just take that loss, they're out of their minds, okay? They don't realize human psychology, the way it works, okay? And we end up with scenarios like this one here. We end up with scenarios where we have tenants who are subleasing apartments out for full market value. We end up with all sorts of insane scenarios that were created because of these artificial government controls over the price of apartment housing. So before I get into the article, go ahead, hit the like, subscribe button, maybe leave a comment down below. Let me know what you think. What do you think of the real estate agent charging these brokerage fees? Do you think that there's a problem with the agent doing it? Do you think the issue is the landlord or the law itself? I already told you my opinion, what I think. New York has a really interesting system where I believe the majority of apartments in New York are actually leased out by real estate brokers or real estate agents, right? The people who own the building, they get brokers to actually fill their units. Right now, that's a little bit different than a lot of the other cities. Everywhere I've invested, the landlord either has a property manager or they have their own employees who are doing the leasing, or they do the leasing themselves. Okay, so it's pretty different when I hear about, the majority of the buildings in New York, you have real estate brokers who are doing that. Now, you can get brokers to do that here, but it's just not as common. Okay, so let's get into this article. It's coming from the New York Post, and it says, opinion: expect more $20,000 broker fees if New York City doesn't fix its housing market mess. Now, the author of the article, was kind of, talking about all of the issues of, how messy the housing market is, right? But I got a different message out of it, and I'm going to get into it as we go through the article. So let's get into it. The Post's report that a Manhattan real estate broker charged a $20,000 fee to get a prospective tenant a rent-regulated apartment on the Upper West Side will probably prompt calls for new consumer protection laws and cries for that agent's license. Far better for New Yorkers to thank broker Ari Wilford for helping to make clear how rent regulation distorts our housing market and invites profiteering. Manhattan's median rent has hit an all-time high of $4,150 a month, but Wilford offered a sweet, regulated one-bedroom apartment for just $1,725. There's a lesson here, but it's not the one housing regulation advocates are likely to draw. So yeah, going over that right there, the average is $4,150 a month, and this rent controlled unit was 1,725. So we're talking about a $2,000+ per month savings by getting this rent controlled unit. So within 10 months, whoever paid the 20 grand has already started to make basically save a great deal of money. So yeah, they had to pay a lot of money out front, but 10 months later, I mean less than a single year, and guess what, with the way rent control works, the tenant never has to leave. So if they want to stay there for 5 or 10 years, they're saving tens of thousands of dollars. Okay, so 20 grand is a small price to pay in my opinion. However, here's the issue, right? It's not helping the people that they claim that they wanted to help. It's not actually making housing more affordable, because how many people actually have 20 grand laying around to even pay those broker fees? Not many. Okay, and this apartment should have been opened up to everyone, and it wasn't. So it sucks in a way, but like I said, I don't believe in rent control at all. So the fact that this real estate broker and this tenant and this landlord all got together and they agreed to this, and that's on them. Okay, they played within the rules set by the city, and now of course all the tenant advocates are mad. Well, why did you play by the rules that we created and then get a good deal? Well, because we understood the rules and we knew what we could do to get around them, to circumvent them. It seems to me that the only one coming out bad in this deal is the landlord, who is forced to rent to this tenant for so far below market value. Just as water flows downhill, markets will assert themselves. When the list price of a good is so far below its actual value to the consumer, shadow markets develop. That's what we have in New York's rent-regulated pseudo market. It's a phenomenon familiar to citizens of dysfunctional countries like Argentina, where governments try to control their currency's value to make imports cheaper and control inflation, but black markets in US dollars develop instead. And yeah, that is the point, okay? They created a pseudo market for, brokers to be able to charge outrageous fees because, simply put, that is what the true value of this place is. The broker knows they can charge $20,000. Hell, the broker probably could have charged $30,000 and still would have had people up there paying that fee because it's such a good deal. It's so much below market value and it's in such the desirable location. So yeah, I mean, it's insane. Like I said before, there are other markets, black markets, that will open up, and that's like people who, like, imagine if this tenant said, hey, I'm going to sublease this place out to another tenant, and I'm going to charge that tenant still below market rate, but $3,000 a month. Well, now you have a tenant who is renting an apartment for $1,725 a month and getting paid $3,000 a month. And the person who's subleasing thinks they got a good deal. The person who is the original tenant is making almost $1,300 a month in profit, and the landlord is just the only one who's not really making anything because the rent control doesn't pay them enough to actually be able to pay their bills. So yeah, the government is out of their minds if they think that these sort of markets, these black markets for this stuff, and these it doesn't work. Okay, it doesn't work, and this is a prime example of that scenario. Price controls make it impossible for supply and demand to balance, and the results include $20,000 broker fees. That sky-high fee would, in a saner world, be a message to Albany. Rent regulation has never been a good idea and never will be. Those who look closely and clearly at the Manhattan housing market know that rent stabilization offers such a good deal for the lucky winners in its game of apartment musical chairs that they stay more than twice as long in their units as those in unregulated ones. That means there are plenty of underoccupied units on the very same Upper West Side where brokers dine out on desperate tenants. A city historically known for welcoming ambitious newcomers is home, in reality, to legions of older tenants whose artificially low rents allow them to stay put, while their home-owning counterparts deal with rising property taxes and must decide whether they still need a big house now that the kids have left home. So yeah, that's a good point right there, right? So in a normal world, if you, let's say that you have yourself a 4-bedroom house, right? And you move in there, you've got 2 or 3 kids, and everything's going great. Your kids eventually they grow up and they go on to college, go on to do whatever they're doing, right? And move out. So then it's just you and your spouse, right? And then you say, hey, we don't need a big 4-bedroom house. Not everybody does this, right? But a lot of people do. And so what they do is they say, hey, we're going to downsize a little bit. We're going to go over to maybe a 2 or a 3-bedroom house with less square footage so that it's easier for us to maintain and, a lot less space. And then what that does is, when you move over to your new smaller home, that allows people who are younger and have those bigger families to move into your bigger home that you didn't need anymore. So in a market like New York, what you end up with is, though, people who, because the rent controlled unit is so cheap, they never leave. So you will have, single individuals who are living in rent controlled units that were built for families, and rather than downsizing, I mean, they will never, even if they downsize, they would never get as good a deal. Okay, they would end up paying more for a smaller unit, so it doesn't make any sense, and that's created by this artificial market. The fixes polls promote to mend a housing market distorted by nearly 1 million rent-regulated units would just make things worse. As the city builds more and more affordable, that is, subsidized housing, more and more tenants will have an incentive to cling to a housing life preserver. But affordable subsidies and so-called inclusionary buildings, which include both income-restricted units and market-rate apartments, are just a recipe for higher rents in the non-affordable apartments, so developers can make projects work out financially. It simply adds new chapters to that notorious tale of two cities, the very rich and very poor. Yeah, subsidized housing within these cities, it doesn't work for just that reason, okay? You create a reason for these tenants to never want to move out of these super cheap subsidized units that they're getting in this. Oh yeah, well, they built these so many affordable units in there. Yeah, well, the tenant's never going to leave. They're going to be sitting in there for 30 or 40 years instead of moving out in 5 years like a normal tenant would, okay? And it creates, just like they said, a city of New York where you have a whole bunch of very poor people and a whole bunch of very rich people, no in between, no middle class. The middle class has moved out to the suburbs and they're not coming back, okay? As soon as they can, they're going to move out there. They're going to, find somewhere that they can afford to live and they don't have to deal with all of this nonsense, okay? So, interesting article. Like I said, I don't blame the broker for taking advantage of that situation. I hope they don't lose their license because it sounds like they were playing within the rules of the law that the government of New York set up.